Hi, I'm your friend Bruce Burke, and we're back recording interviews again. We're kicking off a whole new series under the Absolutely Incredible podcast. Today, I have with me someone I've been connected with for quite a while, but haven't really ever met in person or spoken to or anything else. So today is going to be my opportunity to learn all about Theodora Lau, just like you will in real time. So Theodora has just released, I believe it's still on pre-order. Or is it available now?
It is actually available on the publisher's website from Spring Nature, Paragraph Macmillan, but you can also pre order it on Amazon and
Okay.
bookshop.org because we do support small independent local bookshops, and those are actually available today. Mhm.
Yay. So, book is Banking on Artificial Intelligence, Navigating the Realities of AI in Financial Services. I was putting my newsletter together the other morning and I went to LinkedIn to look up something, and there was a picture of Theodora holding her book. I just reached right out to her. I said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to do this podcast, and we're just starting. Do you want to come on and talk about your book?" And she's like, "Yeah." So here we are. So we're going to do a special kind of a thing today. First, I want you to introduce yourself and tell because I don't know you, they don't know you, they may know you. Maybe that's why they're tuned into this. But Theodora Lau, tell us who you are.
Ooh, how much time do we have? All right, so short, concise version. I like to tell people I'm a troublemaker. I do ask a lot of questions. I ask way too many questions until it get me into trouble. Slightly longer version of it. Techie by heart, engineering by trades. Was in IT and technology for over 20 years, and then all of a sudden realized, wait a minute, there's a slightly more interesting, bigger world out there. To all my wonderful fellow tech people, I do still love you, but I wanted to explore the other side, and so I ended up in nonprofit, where I started looking at how can we use technology to improve, you know, uh, our well-being as we get older. And that's how I got into fintech. That was almost 10 years ago now. So I started my own company and decided to go that right in full time. I do write and I talk. I have my own podcast called One Vision. It's been running for over 5 years, talking to different entrepreneurs, looking at how we can use technology for good. And I love to go around the world and talk to different people and founders because there's always something we can learn from outside our little bubble.
Great, great. And we have a lot of mutual friends. You know, Paolo from IBM and Brett King and Chris Skinner and all those guys, right? And so it's just funny how somebody I met 10 years ago, like it just keeps blossoming, and I just keep meeting more people. Today, we're going to do something a little different in getting to know about Theodora's book. I saw on New York Times does a Hard Fork podcast. It's on. You can look it up on YouTube. And the other day they did a thing where they were figuring out what news stories they were going to talk about, pulling the news stories on a piece of paper out of a hat, and they called it Hat GTP. So today we're going to do cap GTP. I've got my old Wired magazine cap here, my old ball cap, and inside the ball cap, which is right here in front of the camera, I have a bunch of pieces of paper that I wrote all the chapters, the names of the chapters of Theodora's book down in, other than introduction, which gives you the backstory on AI and its origin story and all that sort of thing. So we're just going to kind of go along with this. We're going to let Cap GTP tell us what we should talk about. So I'm going to pull the first one. I'm closing my eyes. I really do not have it. I didn't mark these or anything. So I'm just pulling stuff out of a hat.
I feel
And
like a guinea pig.
you're not a guinea pig. I think this is a great place to start. Ownership rights and governance. I don't know if you can see my lousy handwriting, right? So let's just jump right into the deep end of the pool here, and I'll let you start on that. I think this is a great topic for Theodora Laus to take on.
I think it's an interesting topic. This is actually something I talked about in a keynote last year in December in Hong Kong, where we were focused on copyright laws and responsible AI and the boundaries and whatnot. And this is not a new topic, right? For anyone who has remotely watched the news for the last 2 years, you would have seen the lawsuits between publishing houses with OpenAI and the likes going into all these articles out there, right? Things that we write, books, things that we do, podcasts, videos, and all of these things. Whose right is it? We create it, we produce it, we should have a right to it. Reporters that write a story for New York Times, reporters that write a story for Wired and the reporter, they should have a right and ownership of those assets. So the question becomes, well, when you have companies like OpenAI coming in and crawl through the web to train their model, do they have the right to do so? And how would the compensation work between those companies, right? So that is the underlying question for that particular chapter. And the interesting thing is we've seen divergent views of how it's supposed to work, right? So we've seen companies that strike deals with the larger AI companies that said, okay, here's the licensing, because you know what? They probably figured whatever it is that they do, they can't block these companies from crawling their assets and their content. So they much rather go strike a deal with them and say, here you go, for X dollars, you have access to everything that we write. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, you have independent creators and says, well, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. Because if you start creating a digital avatar that look like me and sound like me, what about me? My right as an artist, my right to earn a living. And then you have the other side of the world, jurisdictions such as Japan, where they were grappling the same thing, right? The anime artist, they're like, well, we don't really want you to train on how we draw and how we create these things. And then you have the other side, the government's like, well, but here's the question of regulation versus innovation. So if you think about it, it's not that much different than what we do in fintech and financial services. You have the EU, you have US. We have slightly different take on where regulations need to be. And then we have opinions from people who said, well, a particular jurisdiction is the way that they are with their funding, with lack of new entrants. Could it be because of more restrictive regulatory framework? So I think those things is things that's why I end that chapter with the world is fragmented, because it is. We have different approaches from different countries, with different views on where we should stand and what the future will look. I think we're still shaking that out.
It's so funny. And, I'm doing the newsletter and creating the other stuff. And sometimes I'm creating it with the help of AI. Sometimes I'm uploading it into other programs and manipulating and, doing other things. And ultimately, like, the software probably is actually doing more than I'm doing, right? When you really come right down to it, right? But ultimately, I'm the one that came up with the idea, that is producing it and is then dispersing it to the public. Should I have 100% rights, 50% rights, 10% rights? It's just, I what I find interesting is the music industry, where everybody that's ever involved in the production of music has some rights, depending on how good their attorney was or deal maker was, right? But in the writing industry, if you're a writer for a publication, it belongs to the publication once you write it, right? And that's it, and you're done, and you got paid, and we'll see you after you write your next great piece, and that's it. So it's really weird, and I think that it really needs to be sorted out somehow, and somehow I think it's going to be the last thing that's ever sorted out, especially now with the race to build AGI. I just don't think they care about compensating the people for training their model. I just don't see that.
So here I'll give you another thing to think about. Imagine you work for a corporate, right? And you've been creating all these wonderful stuff. You have a specific style of creating, for basically coming up with creatives. You have a specific style of writing and all of those. What if one day the company decided that, well, you know what? We really don't want to be paying you salary. We don't want to be paying you benefits and all of these. We're going to downsize, right? Efficiency gains. We talk a lot about that with AI. And you leave. And the next thing you know, they already have a model that's trained on how you write, how you create things. Can they then have a digital version of Bruce that continue what you were doing before you left the company? Did you? Probably not have a right to what you did when you were with the company, right? So there are like different layers of concerns that's out there. Normally in the normal world, even before AI, everything that we write, everything that we publish, right, with a particular company, when we leave, we don't have the right to that. So is this a continuation of the current practice? And if so, the question comes about, is that fair? Because now you have a different way of mimicking what you were doing and producing before. Just a thought.
Okay. Yeah, I like this. Let's not come to a conclusion. Let's just discuss it, right? That's what we're here for, to discuss it. We're not here. We can't fix the problems of AI in a 45-minute session, but we can discuss them. Theodora, tell us, give us some backstory. What's your origin story? I see you're a Star Wars fan. You probably like comics on top of that. You got the Death Star there behind you. How did Theodora get to be where she is now?
I have absolutely no idea. I'll be very honest with you. Every time when people say, well, how did you come about doing what you're doing? I don't know. Things happen. I have to say I've been very fortunate to meet people at the right place at the right time. We talk a lot about that, right? Your career trajectory, where you end up. Oftentimes it depends on who you meet and who you're in the circle with, and that's practically that, because I started out as a chemical engineer. That's my background. I went to engineering school. You can't be more hardcore than that. Upstate New York, did my thing, realized that I really want to be doing something else, so I ended up in telco. My background, spent almost 20 years in telecom back in the days when we had wire lines, all the way to CLEC. I don't even know if people know what CLEC is anymore. And then to wireless, and then high speed wireless, to the version before you have LTE. So we had a different standard called WiMAX. So that was the last thing I did in wireless, and I did a lot of systems integration, building a lot of systems, CRM, billing systems. And then kids happened. So took a little break, very short break. And then try to come back to work. And people were like, well, wait a minute, you can't work. You have children. Okay, well, nobody ever asked the father if they could come back to work. Why are you asking the mother that? So it was a reality check, because I basically I spent my first half of my career in very, very male dominated environment. It was all men, always men. My last team, we had over 100 people, mostly men. And I grew up, I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and we always had help because it's so easy to find help. I never had the appreciation of, after I moved to the US in the 90s, that, wait a minute, certain gender in the household typically have to bear more of the burden, and, all of the things that everyone knows about. I don't need to reiterate it, but it gave me a wake-up call that basically said, whoa, there's more that we need to think about as a society. And then just by luck, I ended up in an NGO, and the rest was history.
Well, you're talking my language when you're talking telecom, because that's really where I came from. I
lot
worked
of us
for
are.
facilities-based carrier. We ran an OC48 network out of one Wilshire. We were doing prepaid calling cards. We were on UUNet, and so we had Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, like a U.S. origination because of that VoIP network in the early days of telecom. And that business came to pass, and that was the end of that. But that led me. So I went from doing prepaid to doing international mobile top up. We developed a point of sale system to our retailers where you could walk into retailer locally here in the US, and you could top up like 251 carriers and countries around the world. You could send the gift of airtime home, essentially. I went onto Twitter and started tweeting about uh, uh, international mobile top up and started running into all these guys that were doing the mobile money. Rob, he was at DNB then. Rob Finley, I think you know Rob, and Neil Cross, right, and all that. And I started meeting Brett King and uh, 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 what's it, Haynes from Fundamo and all that. These are all the people that I started meeting. This is how this happened, right? And I got into fintech as a result of it, right? So but this isn't about me. This is about you, and I can go on forever about me. So let's. But you've got a friend in telecom here, right? So,
There are a lot of us. I think the interesting part is if you look at between the two industries, right, telecom and financial services, they're very similar in many ways. It's highly regulated, very old systems, very siloed data. And it's a need, right? The need to move money and the need to move communications, need to move data. There is a lot of things that I think we can cross learn, that we still do cross learn. It's fascinating. I don't know. It's in my blood. I just love it.
I want to introduce you to. I was speaking about him before we went on camera, but Malora, I want to introduce you to him. He's doing some stuff with Vladimir. He was a consultant for Tata, and now he's doing some stuff with Vladimir. But he's also got a stealth startup that he's working on, and I think you might be interested in. Really nice guy, and he's an old telecom guy too. So good connection.
Awesome.
Next, Cap GTP subject is
God. What's next?
Trust and evolution of risk.
Trust is overrated. No, kidding. Trust. What can we say about trust? Trust is that was actually a really, really interesting chapter to write, because if you think about the foundation of financial services is trust, right? So what we must do, and everything we must do, is to protect the integrity of our industry. When I put money into my account, I need to trust that I can take that money out when I need to, right? The inherent act of putting money in is an act of trust. That I'm sending money to you. You need to trust that I'll do that. You need to trust that your bank will send you the money. You need to trust that you'll be able to get that. Same with like everything else that we do. Trust is the foundation of our being. Gosh, that sounds good. Actually, I should use that. But if you start thinking about what we're doing with artificial intelligence, and specifically what we have been doing the last few years, you are introducing additional elements. You are introducing additional third parties, multiple third parties in a lot of instances. Then it becomes, well, whose responsibility will be when things fail? How do we find accountability? If we cannot iron out who needs to do what and who is accountable for what, how can we build trust in something that we can't see, in something that we can't touch? And then you start thinking about, what about generative AI? Because everyone talks about Gen AI the last few years. Well, that's interesting because I've been using it to create deepfake videos. And unless, for those who know me well, I've been able to fool people. And it is so easy. That's the scary part. Scammers are always going to be there. Bad actors will always go where money is. That's just a fact of life. But what technology can do is now, instead of the prince from a different continent who wants you to send them money, now this is like a really, really nicely crafted note that sounds so real, right? There's no spelling mistakes. There's the oh my God, wait, oh yeah, I know you. Do you really know me? And so the rise of deepfake videos, deepfake audios, all of these things, it just additional tools for bad actors to scam people. Then on the flip side is, are we ready? What can we do to safeguard our institution? What can we do to safeguard the customers who bank with us? Because at the end of the day, again, it goes back to the trust element. That chapter was really interesting. But then the other more eye-opening part of that chapter when I was writing it, and I know not most people really don't like the word risk management and they cringe when they hear risk management, but I think it is important. It's an important function because it helps make sure that we have the guardrails in place and make sure that we think about things that we really need to think about. And so when we think about risk management development framework around the world, that's where things got really interesting. You start looking at Australia, you start looking at the UK. There are a lot of these different jurisdictions that they've come up with things that basically help guide their industry, including financial services, on what to do when we start thinking about putting AI into our ecosystem. So it was a very eye opening way of understanding how other um, jurisdictions work, because that's always the fun part. Like, what the one thing that got me really, really interested into fintech was way back when they had super apps, right, in Asia. And the idea and the notion of being able to just go around with your mobile phone and pay everything with just a QR code was dumbfounding. I'm like, really? And then I was in Shanghai, I remember, and I went to Hongju. And I got yelled at everywhere I went. I had absolutely no idea what they said. I'm like, okay, all right, people are yelling at me. And okay, they are upset with me. I didn't realize until a few days later when a friend of mine told me this that they are upset with you because you are transacting in cash. No one is using cash anymore. Everything is QR code payment. And I'm like, well, this was back when the apps don't work with the American cards, with the U.S. issued cards. So even though I had a card attached to it, I couldn't make it work. So I was going around with cash like this crazy tourist. And that was when it dawned on me: the world has moved on. A huge chunk of the world has moved on and leaped onto a different way of living. And here we are, still thinking, well, you know, you have Visa, you have MasterCard, you have your cash, you have your checkbook, all good. But that wasn't the case. It was that was when it started getting me really, really curious about, well, there's a lot more that we need to learn, that we should learn. And the same applies to AI.
I found it very interesting that Sam Altman, the one who's probably the biggest proponent of AI right now in the industry, as far as being the head of an industry leader, at the same time is promoting his world orb that scans your eyeball and locks your identity to that eyeball. And he says that's the one thing that really almost can't be duplicated. And that's something that he's funding and building at the same time, he's connecting with the federal government for the Stargate thing. So it's just really interesting as far as a trust program. Uh, Someone who's pushing AI says we really are going to need something in the future that tells us who's a real person and who's AI.
Would you actually trust anyone with your eyeball and your DNA, Bruce?
Sam, not so sure.
Exactly, right? So it go
I find it interesting. I said.
there's a lot of things I find it interesting with that particular company. I will not go into details, but I think, again, it goes back to, why is trust so important to our industry? Why is it that we need to safeguard it at all costs? Because it comes with risks, right? Brand risk. Think about, is beyond monetary losses. It's people see a bank, right? There are so many studies. People, well, we don't really like banks, but we still trust them because it's there. It's always been there, and it comes with it, and that is something that if you're not careful, you lose it. Like a particular bank that made headlines about, what, 7, 8 years ago, I lost count, with their dubious account opening schemes, shall we say. you lose trust and you probably won't want to be banking with them. So those are things that you need to be careful with. Innovate, yes, but innovate with intention and innovate carefully, I would say, is a good mantra to have.
I
I don't
was
know.
just
What do
reading
I know?
before we started the closing statement in your book that was written. I forget landings,
Landings, yeah, Brian.
right?
Brian wrote that.
And how he was talking about, he was talking about this kind of thing, right? Like
Mhm.
how do we meet all customers at all levels? Who do we leave out when we uptake AI? Right? Who are we leaving behind? Right? And that's not just with Landine's credit union. That's with the globe,
Yeah.
right? When we uptake AI and there's a digital divide, who are we leaving behind, right?
Mhm.
I think you're friends with John Owens, right? He does a lot of work around the world and tries to help with money and policy and all that sort of thing in emerging markets, right? And I find that's why I got into fintech. We went from doing international mobile top up to, well, there's billions of people not being served by financial services, right?
Mhm.
And me, here from Clearwater, Florida, having no worldview whatsoever, discovered that, and I was like, oh my god! And that's what really got me into fintech. But fintech got me into AI, and even in a broader sense, I'm more like fintech's like a bright shiny object and I'm a crow, right? So it really is. I'm an expert. Next pert. Next pert. I'm gonna say it again.
Oh.
Yeah. Moving on. I don't like that one. That one's
Oh,
too close to what we
okay.
just did.
Next one. Ask.
Next chapter from Cap GTP. Here's a good one. Win at all costs? Question mark. Not
Oh,
just
I do like that
we're
one.
just segueing from one right into the next. That's perfect. That was good.
I like that one a lot. It was a, I wanted to say, is a reaction, if you will, of things that I've seen the past few years. Right? It's the I think it's a good way to say it embodies. Originally, the book I was going to call it duality of AI, and I still think it is really true. And this chapter practically represents that. As much as we like to say, AI is the best thing since sliced bread, the future is going to be AI, the future is going to be shiny, the da 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 da, is going to allow us to do all these wonderful things that we're not able to do before. But at what cost is what I found myself constantly asking. Um, data centers. Data centers use a lot of energy, use a lot of water. Um, a bunch of a particular big tax data centers rest in water scarce areas, places that didn't have enough and don't have enough clean water for people to consume. So now all of a sudden you're going in and building this giant box that's going to consume even more clean water. At what cost, right? And who is it going to benefit is the other part of the question that I ask a lot. If we think about artificial intelligence, we think about the data models. We think about what goes into the data model, right? In the very beginning, we talk about the content that ingests and how it learns. Much of that is from Western cultures. Much of that is from Western languages. Much of that is, it mimics how we write and how we think about life and how our life is structured on this part of the world. Well, there are billions of people in this world, and they don't all talk and look and act like we do. As a matter of fact, there are over 7,100 languages in the entire world. That's living languages. People are speaking it, practicing using it. Most of the large language models they have maybe 50-ish languages, at the most 100. And then again, I asked the question, what happens to the rest of the 7,100 languages who are not represented in anything that we do today? We are advancing the world and we say the future is going to be X, but at what cost? Are we just going to tell these people, oops, sorry, you don't quite make the ROI, we can't quite make it work? Is all about supply demand and yeah, next, right? And it goes back to internet. it goes back to, back in the 90s, right? When we first got emails, I remember I was so excited. I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. And my school, we all had Unix. So it was like a hardcore, we have Unix stations everywhere. And we use it, we do research, we use it to like send emails. And at that time, we thought of this is such an amazing tool for us to bring researchers closer together from different parts of the world, right? You're connecting universities together. You're allowing us to tap into this huge world of knowledge that we otherwise would have to go to the library and look through encyclopedia, which we still do. I mean, I still have a set in here at home. That was how the future of the world was supposed to be, was bring us closer together. Fast forward to, I don't know, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2025. Yeah, it didn't quite work out that way, did it? We kind of splintered a little bit, or quite a bit. So are we repeating what we were doing with Web 2? Or are we truly creating a different future that finally can bring us closer together? That was the question that I grappled with. And then the other part of it was going back to originally who was benefiting from the technology, right? So for a lot of these things to work, you need talent, you need resources, you need data, you need a lot of these things to make it work. It's not like, magic wand, you wave it and it works. So if you look back in our industry, you look at, who has been able to experiment with what's going on. You have the JPMs of the world, you have the BFAs of the world, you have the Cap One, you have these few banks that stood out because they have the size, because they have the people, because they have the data, they have the talent, they have all of those necessary ingredients. Is that a sure win? No. But does it get them ahead? Yes, absolutely. So what's going to happen with the smaller banks, right? Are they going to just sit there and wait for the regulators to tell them what they cannot do because their risk appetite is a little different? Are they going to sit there and wait for, I don't know, some other fintechs to come in and rescue them, a big tech to come in and say, here you go, here are the 5 different solutions we can bring together? Oh, now let's look at your third party risk. Let's look at what exactly can you do, right? So again, it goes back to, does size matters? Is a rhetorical question. I think it very much does. Is not 100%, right? We've seen models that work well in China that are much smaller than what we have with the large language models. So yeah, I think there is a different path. There could be a different path that we can create something that consumes less resources. And it goes to something we see in fintech a lot with innovation. Why do I always think that the markets outside of the US is more interesting? Because you have less access to resources. You are more scarce. You don't have the abundance. So when you get hungrier, when you're more restricted and what you have access to, you become more creative. So it was a question. What is the future going to be like? I don't know.
I think that's a fair question, and I really it's strange how quickly a conversation about AI turns from a technological discussion to a democratic discussion to almost a theological discussion next, right? They all seem to follow that path towards deity or whatever, right? It's just strange how it goes. But anyway, moving
Because we're
on.
humans, Bruce. I'm not talking to a bot unless you are one.
No.
So if
No.
we're both humans, we're talking to humans. Technology is a means for humans to get to humans.
So while we're down here exploring the bottom of the pyramid, our next one is representation matters.
It's precisely that. It's precisely that, right? Who do we have at the table to decide what matters? Who do we have at the table to basically say this is something that we need to think about? Is humans of AI. Intention matters. And representation matters. We've all seen it. And that's the thing, right? I try really hard to intertwine what we do in financial services with aspect of tech. And that was the genesis of the book is I don't want this to be a tech book. I don't want this to be a banking book. I think these two worlds have collided enough that we need to look at it together cohesively. How do we each influence each other? So, if we think about representation, we think about lending. Lending is a great example, right? You are using the data that we have historically. How does that influence the outcome? Because now it's not just like, oh, this tech, it doesn't work quite well. We'll do an upgrade. The repercussions of the algorithm making a negative decision is much larger when it impacts people's outcomes, when it impacts people's financial well-being, when it impacts their ability to perhaps expand the business or stay afloat. When it becomes money, it matters a great deal. So
Okay. I really like that. I when I first got it, like I said, the emerging markets is what drew me into fintech, and and in the 2010s when I first got into fintech, that was the guys that were doing the mobile money. We didn't have the word fintech back then. It was mobile banking, mobile finance, mobile commerce, mobile money, right? And the guys that were doing that, those were the outliers, the rebels, the ones that were, like you said, the ones that were being resourceful and coming up with new ways. And now it seems like fintech is just everybody wants to tie up with a bank, right?
I think we should
And
get rid of that word. I think it's
tie up,
overused.
the tie up,
No,
or bank.
fintech. Get rid
Yeah.
of fintech. Have you ever seen
I'm
anything
still
that
never
doesn't
sure
involve
whether to capitalize the T or not. 10, 15 years later, I'm still
I
not
am
sure.
in the camp of uppercase T. I don't know. I know that with one version of the book, the editor has a huge hiccup with no, it's not uppercase. I'm like, no, really, it's uppercase. I don't know. It's a very divisive, surprisingly divisive topic. Are you in the
Mobile money, I
uppercase?
thought, was more descriptive, but now
Yeah.
it's really not about mobile money anymore. It's really about banks and cards, it seems like, right? And,
Mhm.
and applying electronic bookkeeping to your mortgage or whatever, right? It all, when someone raised a question of me a couple of years ago, they said, hey, do you know what's really big right now in banking and fintech? And I was like, embedded payments, open banking,
Banking as a service.
invisible banking. Like, I'm so bored with all these. Are you going to tell me something like that? Because I'm not going to be impressed. And he's like, no, AI. And I was like, now there's something refreshing and new, right? And I went and started doing my diligence, and I realized like how big and how important it is, in like it's one of the industries that probably stands to gain the most from artificial intelligence, financial tech services. It's amazing. And I don't think financial services is focused on it still enough yet. Even with the JPMs and the cities and those guys doing their thing, I don't. Your little guys, they can't afford to.
No, they can't afford to. We have
They
ways
don't
to
have
go.
the talent inside. They can't afford to hire, right? They can't do that either because they're right. So it's kind of strange. So I'm not going to do that one either because we already kind of touched on that. So moving on, and we already talked about that kind of too. The cap GTP is hallucinating, so I'm putting up the guardrails here.
Humans in the loop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they say when they have all self-driving cars, putting the humans in with them is what's going to screw everything up, right?
I don't know. I don't have a self-driving car. I don't
Neither
plan
do
to
I.
have one. Not just yet.
Yeah. The rise of AI and generative AI.
Oh, why are we going back? We're going back. It's like old news now, isn't it? It's that so a little bit of context how the book was originally structured. I meant to do it in 3 parts. The original 2 chapters is more about setting lay of the land, the context, the history, the fact that Hi, I know everyone is talking about AI and everyone's really excited about AI, but it's been around for quite a while. It's been around since 1940s. It exists in various forms, shapes, and we got really, really excited when ChatGPT came, but it's only a small sliver of AI. So that was the context. That's actually how that particular chapter came about, is what have we already used it for, right? The technology, we have used that tech for a while, oftentimes in back office automation. We have seen, jurisdictions, for example, outside of the US, that have used it in micro lending for, gosh, at least 7, 8 years. We have used it, we've seen it being used in fraud in various aspects. But now it's like, wait a minute, we can all touch it, we can all feel it, we can all see, do it, some interesting stuff. Not always correct, but interesting things. So now all of a sudden we're like, whoa, this is cool. We can use it to create creatives. We can use it in call centers. We can use it to help employees tap into a pile of documents much faster. I've had a CPA who told me that they've been able to reduce so many of the entry level analyst roles because you don't need a team of, fresh graduates to go through these documents in a painful manner anymore. You can shortcuts go much faster. So there are different uses of AI, and everyone is talking about AI. I was joking actually recently in a conference in London that if I were to get a pound every time when someone says the word AI, I probably could have like retired by the end of the conference because it was insane. But AI is not magic, right? It is absolutely not magic. If you look at, there's no lack of people talking about hallucinations. It started with Air Canada chatbot, and it, gave a wrong information to a customer, and the customer got really upset and said, "Hey, why are you telling me the wrong thing?" And Air Canada actually had the audacity to come out and say, "Oh, that's the bot. That's not us." Um, really? No, the bot is on your site. Is you. Hello. Brand management 101. So we see things where it works, and we see areas where it doesn't quite work. And I think is more of a precautionary, don't sprinkle AI pixie dust everywhere. Find use cases that actually make sense, that works, and then put in the guardrails to make sure that the areas doesn't work quite well won't get us into trouble.
Quick story. My at the end of the phone card era, when VoIP was essentially ending the need for prepaid phone cards, we were closing up the company, and I took solace in playing PlayStation 2, Sega's Virtua Fighter 4. And that was my first exposure to AI. You could use AI to train your fighter against the other fighters and learn the other fighters' moves. And so you could be essentially all those fighters. And I used it extensively, and I trained my guy to where I was unbeatable. And I didn't go to CES this year, but I tuned in to the keynote with Jensen from NVIDIA. And Jensen came out on the stage with his new alligator jacket on, right? And he's talking all this stuff. And he says, "But I want to tell you a story about how I began." He says, "This company, Sega, was the first one that ever gave me he says, I was doing the game stuff and I had the game cards and I was doing the graphics, but I had this AI stuff and nobody's let me, but this Sega company let me do it. And in this Virtual Fighter 4, they let me put this AI in there." And that's how I got started with AI. And I almost fell out of the chair. It was so incredible. I was like, what the, what the, what the, what? I used to joke and tell people, "Oh, yeah, I played around with AI like 10 years. This was 2001, 2002, PlayStation 2. I mean, we're at what, 5 now? So,
I think. Lost
something.
track. You
Shreddy,
lose track
shred.
when you have children in the house. Yeah, it's actually fascinating when you see how one piece of technology can become an inflection point. Same thing with iPhones, right? These things that came about. I remember the first one that came out, iPhone 1. Actually, I got it because I was like, oh, this is interesting. It's different. We're so used to the Nokia phones. And actually, at that time, I had a Sony Ericsson. Oh my God, I love my Sony Ericsson phones because they're unlocked. I can put the SIM, I can just travel to Asia and Europe, and it worked. And then I'm like, oh, this thing is interesting. It looks different. So I bought it. I remember I was lining up like a dork outside the Apple store and I bought it. And within a few days, I was due to travel to Tel Aviv. So I took my phone with me to Tel Aviv and I had no idea how much data I was consuming. Absolutely no idea. I was like, that I was like showing off, like, oh yeah, this is so cool. It didn't have much, but it had, I still remember I had the weather app. And I was like looking, oh, this is cool. And everyone was like, hovering around looking. And it obviously wasn't the same great experience we have right now. Bandwidth is different, all of that is different. But it was so novel. It was so cool. And I came back with a $350 data roaming charge. Oh my God. So I still remember that. And I remember how much, everyone was dissing the phone. And I was working for a carrier at that time. I have to hide the phone because, it wasn't our carrier. But it was, and the rest is history, right? The rest is history. Now we're at 2025, and this is like it enabled so much afterwards, right? The ability to call a car in the middle of the street, the ability to move money everywhere we are, the ability to connect with people. It feels like our lives don't shut down anymore. It's running 24/7. Face recognition, music, everything on the go, a little computer right here. None of this was possible before the iPhone, right? It became a trigger that created massive industries after, just like what you were talking about your game.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you were talking about the telecom. I went from Blackberries to a Sprint Evo 4G because of the WiMAX network when Dan was still the president of Sprint, right? And he wore the long trench coat and all that. I went to WiMAX was deployed here in Tampa Bay, and it
That
was
was
the best thing
my
going.
baby. Why Max was
I
my baby.
And I took that Evo 4G to Singapore with me to go to the GSMA mobile money. It was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation year that they were doing all the study and everything. I got invited to go to that. I was writing for Mobile Payments Today then with James Wester. I was one of his columnists at Mobile Payments Today. So
Oh,
it all kind of comes back in full circle.
it
So
did come back in full circle. So I was doing the tech stack behind the WiMAX network. So our system, it takes the provisioning data and then it does the billing, the CRM, and all of that, and the self care. That was my stack. Oh my God. You're bringing memories back. And I remember at that time we had two things. So we have the device, but we also had the data cards and the little antenna that we had to stick out on the side of of the uh the laptop. And I would drive around like a dork, literally, and looking for, okay, where does it work? And then stay there and testing things. Oh my God, this was
and then
crazy.
I moved to Tampa and they deployed the Spark version of WiMAX, which was an even faster speed, but it was only in certain areas. It was almost
Mhm.
like a line of
Yeah.
sight thing. It was, they deployed it down Dale Mabry Highway, and I was living right off of Dale Mabry Highway in Tampa. And I could lay in bed for the first time ever, and I still had the Evo 4G and put up the little kickstand and lay there and I watched Breaking Bad, the whole series. I caught the flu and I watched Breaking Bad on the WiMAX on the Spark network, the whole thing for a week while I was sick.
God, that's crazy. That's crazy. I think we used it for a hockey game. We were watching ESPN. But the rest was history. The
So
rest was
here's a
history.
good way to draw it all together. You ready? It's the last one in the head. It just so happens after my hallucination guard railing. This is a good one to bring it all together with. The future of work. Look at my handwriting, huh? How bad is that?
Lovely handwriting.
Yes.
Future of work. What does that look like? I think we got a glimpse of it, don't we? We hear likes of Klarna coming out and say, well, we're going to need so few people because AI can do it all. And then we see companies laid off thousands and thousands of people because of perceived efficiency gains. And then we also, on the other side of it, hear companies that, yeah, we made really, really good results on, but we couldn't quite move beyond that. So we don't exactly quite know what to do with this thing. I think it is an interesting thing to ponder because there are many trends that intersect with it, right? One is we are living longer. Actually, that's how it started in fintech, because we are all living longer. Ha, surprise. We're living an extra 30 years compared to, people from the early 1900s. So the question becomes, what do we do with the extra 30 years? Do we work more? Do we change the way we work? And with that brings a question. Things that we learned back in our 20s, in our teenage years, is not going to be applicable by the time we turn 40, 50, 60, 70. So we have to keep learning. There was a study from World Economic Forum that talked about by 2030, more than half of the world's population going to have to relearn something different because things are changing so fast. And so if you layer that with longevity trend, with how AI is impacting how we work, then the question becomes, what do we do? You can't just keep laying off people. We need to find ways to bring them back, and we need to find ways to retrain and upskill them. And I think that's the gist behind that chapter was, as I kept doing research and I kept looking at all these reports that companies come, not just in banking, but in tech and everywhere, you see and hear a lot about we are becoming more efficient. But what about the people, right? You lay off thousands of workers. Where do these people go? Wouldn't it make more sense if we have more of a structure in place to reskill and upskill them? Because you can't, people are not like always interchangeable. And sometimes it's nice to keep the institutional knowledge that they have. And it creates a pathway, not just for one particular company, but for our society at large, to know that there is a way for us to continue to go. And then alongside with that is, what about people that don't have access to this knowledge? How can we bring them into the economy? How can we help them get access to the tools? How can we train them? And how can we help them be useful and successful in this future? And it's a work in progress.
I was watching, I think it was from Davos, one of the panels from Davos the other day, putting together the newsletter, right? And one of the speakers was talking about, he's like, in digital transformation of an organization, let's say a bank, right? He says, the digital transformation, the systems and the computing and the networking and all that stuff is already there. That's not the hard part of digital transformation. The hard part of digital transformation is the getting the buy-in from the people that are already there, that are not digitally transformed yet, that are still analog individuals and have not uptaking the digital tools. That's really that's the slowest part of the digital transformation, is getting the people to transform with the system.
People, see? Come back full circle. It's about the people, always.
And I find it interesting. I don't know why. I have never heard anybody talk about it. I've never said anything about it. But there's a cartoon on Fox TV called Universal Basic Income, guys. And nobody's ever said a word about it ever in the channels or anything. But I find it fascinating that we're already being seeded with this idea. They all worked at a hot dog factory in Oshkosh, Wisconsin or something, right? And the hot dog factory shut down, and now it's their misadventures because they're all unemployed and have nothing to do all day, and they're getting the checks and they're out running around getting all these adventures, right? But I was like, are we that close already where
No.
there's, right?
By the
I
way,
don't think
I
so.
lived in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I did live there for a year, so
Did you? Wow.
fun fact.
I just made up a name. I don't remember, but I'm cognitive. What can I say? Anyway, so close out. Tell us, where can we find Theodora Lau next? And I mean, like, what are you doing? I see you're doing a book signing at Fintech Meetup. When is that? Tell us all about that.
Yeah, we have a book signing, the first book signing in the US at FinTech Meetup with Data Mart. We have a breakfast session running on Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. And then I'll be at the booth at 10:30 to do signing. And then after that, I'm trying to think. I will be at Alchemy Collab in Nashville, April 1st. We will have a few copies of the book there as well. We'll be having a few panel discussions about AI. And then after that, I will be at SaaS Innovate. Again, book signing, and then Finovate Spring in San Diego. So far, I can't keep track of my calendar, but I'm grateful that I've had a lot of wonderful colleagues that have reached out and wanted to have spread the word, and including you. So thank you, Bruce.
And we've been promoting it every day in the newsletter, the book and whatnot. What's the web address where they can go and find out about the book? I've been promoting it in the newsletter, but
bankingonaibook.com or bankingonartificialintelligence.com. They both work. And the book is also on Amazon.
Okay. Theodora, thank you so much. I appreciate you beating the maiden voyage. I hope you enjoyed interacting with Cap GTP in real time.
I think I like the human better, but thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
The reasoning is paper analog bound.
Paper works. Paper always works. Paper and pen, there's something romantic and beautiful about it. So.
I don't think we'll ever replace paper books.
No, please don't. No.
Yes.
No. I love paper books.
I saw the new Kindle. They've been pushing the new Kindle with the fact that you could just write anywhere on it, right? You can put a note in the margin or whatever. And I was like, I still don't want it. Still don't want it. I have no interest. So I want to remind you, stick around for a minute afterwards because we got to finish waiting for all this stuff to upload. But thanks so much again.
Thank you. Hope to see you in real life.
I'll be out there. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
I'm going to put the stop on here. And thanks so much, everybody. And look forward to more and more and more coming down. So thanks so much. Bye-bye.